The Boeing 777 shuddered through turbulence at 37,000 feet, somewhere over the Pacific's endless blue expanse. In Seat 8C, Zara Khalil sipped her chamomile tea with steady hands, her fingers adorned with understated platinum rings worth more than most people's houses. The financial markets had closed favorably in Tokyo, her semiconductor empire expanding into new territories, while she flew toward another board meeting in San Francisco. At 34, she commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents, her Pakistani-American heritage opening doors her brilliant mind had already unlocked. But something was wrong with this flight. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with barely controlled tension. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties. I need to ask if there are any military personnel aboard, particularly anyone with combat aviation experience. Passengers exchanged nervous glances. A businessman in first class mentioned his son in the Air Force. A college student claimed her boyfriend flew drones. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced calm that didn't quite hide their fear. Zara continued sipping her tea. "Captain Morrison to any qualified personnel," came another announcement, more desperate now. "We have confirmation of hostile aircraft approaching our position. This is not a drill." Through her window, Zara caught the glint of metal against the afternoon sun, sleek fighters closing distance with predatory precision. Her trained eye immediately recognized the swept wings and twin engines of F-16 Fighting Falcons, but something was off about their markings. These weren't American jets. "Jesus Christ," whispered the man beside her, a software engineer from Seattle who'd spent the flight complaining about airline food and delayed connections. Are those military jets?" The captain's voice returned, now openly pleading. "We have visual confirmation of 2 armed aircraft. They appear to be not friendly. If anyone aboard has any combat experience whatsoever." Zara set down her teacup with deliberate precision. She pressed the call button. The flight attendant, a young woman named Michelle whose hands trembled slightly, approached with forced professionalism. "Yes, ma'am." "Tell Captain Morrison that Major Khalil is aboard," Zara said quietly, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to life-or-death decisions. "Call sign Phoenix. 7 years active duty, F-22 Raptor pilot. 3 tour Afghanistan, 2 classified operations I can't discuss here." Michelle's eyes widened. Around them, passengers began to turn, whispers spreading like wildfire. The billionaire in the designer suit, drinking tea like she was at a garden party, was claiming to be a fighter pilot. "Ma'am, I'll relay that immediately," Michelle stammered, already moving toward the cockpit. Zara returned to her tea, watching the hostile aircraft grow larger against the vast Pacific sky, knowing everything was about to change. The shuddering of the aircraft intensified as Captain Morrison's voice filled the cabin once more. This time directed specifically toward Seat 8C, the hostile fighters had closed to within 2 miles, close enough that passengers on the starboard side could make out their angular silhouettes with naked eyes, close enough to see the absence of any recognizable national markings. "Major Khalil, this is Captain Morrison. Please report to the flight deck immediately." The desperation in his voice was palpable now, bleeding through the professional composure commercial pilots spent years perfecting. Zara unbuckled her seatbelt with fluid grace, ignoring the stares of every passenger within earshot. The software engineer beside her grabbed her arm. "Wait, you're actually serious. You're really a pilot." "Was," she corrected, gently removing his hand. "Different lifetime." She moved through the cabin with purpose, her designer heels silent against the aircraft flooring. Passengers watched her pass. This woman who looked like she belonged in a Fortune 500 magazine, not a fighter jet. Whispered conversations followed in her wake. "Did she say F-22? Phoenix, isn't that some kind of call sign?" My God, what's happening to this flight? Captain Morrison met her at the cockpit door, his face pale beneath his gray mustache. First Officer Patricia Reeves, a 20-year veteran herself, looked up from her instruments with a mixture of relief and skepticism. Ma'am, with all due respect, we're dealing with a potentially hostile intercept scenario here. This isn't. Two F-16C Block 50 Fighting Falcons, approximately 1,500 meters off our starboard wing, Zara interrupted, settling into the observer seat without invitation. Twin General Electric F-110 engines, maximum speed Mach 2.05, combat radius roughly 300 miles. They're maintaining intercept formation but haven't locked targeting radar yet. Your threat warning system would be screaming if they had. Both pilots stared. Morrison found his voice first. How do you? Because I've been exactly where they are, Captain. Different uniform, same mission parameters. Zara's eyes fixed on the approaching aircraft through the cockpit windows. Question is, what do they want with a civilian airliner? Reeves checked her instruments again. We've tried contacting air traffic control. Complete radio silence. Even emergency frequencies are dead. Not dead, Zara murmured, watching the fighter's flight pattern with practiced eyes. Jammed. Someone doesn't want us talking to the outside world. As if summoned by her words, the radio crackled to life, not with air traffic control, but with an unfamiliar voice speaking accented English. Commercial flight designation UAL 847. You will alter course to heading 270 and descend to flight level 250. Comply immediately or face consequences. The cockpit fell silent except for the steady hum of engines and electronics. Morrison's knuckles went white on the controls. They want us to turn toward. There's nothing but ocean in that direction, and restricted airspace. Zara studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating distances, fuel consumption, potential landing sites. 7 years removed from active duty, but the training never truly faded. Captain, what's your fuel state? Approximately 6 hours remaining at current consumption. Any military bases within range of that heading? Morrison and Reeves exchanged glances. There's Kwangsei Air Base, Reeves said quietly. But that's North Korean territory, Zara finished. Which means this isn't random. Someone planned this intercept very carefully. The hostile fighters adjusted position slightly, moving closer in perfect formation. Professional, disciplined, dangerous. The radio crackled again, more insistent now. UAL 847, you have 30 seconds to comply with course change. This is your final warning. Captain Morrison's hands hovered over the controls, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool cockpit air. Major, Khalil, what would you do? Zara's reflection stared back from the cockpit glass, a billionaire CEO in a tailored suit, preparing to make decisions that could save or doom 237 souls. She thought of her corner office overlooking the San Francisco Bay, of board meetings and quarterly reports and stock options. Another world entirely from this moment. I'd buy us some time, she said finally, and pray we're smarter than whoever's pulling the strings down there. Morrison hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, then began adjusting the aircraft's heading. This is UAL 847. We are complying with your instructions, turning to heading 270, descending to flight level 250. Through the speakers came what might have been satisfaction. Acknowledged, UAL 847. Maintain heading and altitude. Any deviation will result in immediate engagement. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Zara closed her eyes briefly, feeling the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders despite the expensive suit and civilian life she'd built. When she opened them again, the woman looking back from the cockpit glass was someone different. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, but the pilot who'd earned her call sign in the unforgiving skies over Kandahar. Captain, I need to ask about your passenger manifest, she said quietly. Anyone aboard who might be valuable to hostile actors. Morrison fumbled for his tablet, fingers clumsy with stress. We have, let's see, 3 State Department officials traveling on diplomatic passports. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the nuclear physicist, she was lecturing at Tokyo University. Senator Williams from the Armed Services Committee. And, he paused, looking up at Zara with dawning understanding. And apparently a former Air Force major who happens to be worth about $2 billion. $3 billion, Zara corrected absently, her mind racing through possibilities. But who's counting? First Officer Reeves monitored their descent, calling out altitude markers. 28,000, 27,000. Captain, at this rate and heading, will be in North Korean airspace within 90 minutes. The hostile fighters maintained their escort position with mechanical precision. Professional pilots, Zara noted. Not some ragtag insurgent group flying stolen aircraft. This operation had government backing, significant resources, careful planning. Have either of you ever dealt with a hostile intercept before? She asked. Both pilots shook their heads. Morrison cleared his throat nervously. Nothing like this. Bird strikes, mechanical failures, weather emergencies, but never. Armed aircraft forcing course changes toward hostile territory, Zara finished. It's not exactly covered in commercial pilot training. She leaned forward, studying the instrument panel with eyes that automatically calculated threat vectors, fuel consumption rates, escape windows. The Boeing 777 was a magnificent machine, reliable, efficient, capable of crossing oceans with grace. But it was also utterly defenseless against modern fighter aircraft. Here's what we know, she said, slipping into the briefing tone that had once commanded squadrons. Someone wanted this specific aircraft with this specific passenger manifest at this specific time. This isn't random terrorism or simple hijacking. It's targeted extraction. Morrison's voice was barely audible. Extraction of who? Zara met his eyes in the reflection of the cockpit glass. Outside, the Pacific stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful, vast, and suddenly more dangerous than any battlefield she'd ever known. Someone worth starting an international incident over, she said simply. Question is, are they after the diplomats, the scientist, the senator? She paused, considering. Or the pilot? The radio crackled with routine position updates from their escorts, cold, professional voices treating their forced course change like any other military exercise. But Zara heard something else beneath the surface: anticipation. Whatever was waiting at the end of this heading, someone was very eager to meet them. As the Boeing 777 continued its forced descent toward an uncertain fate, Zara Khalil found herself remembering why she'd left active duty 7 years ago. Some battles, she'd learned, followed you home regardless of how far you ran or how much money you made trying to forget them. Now one of those battles had found her at 37,000 feet, disguised as a routine business flight. And for the first time in years, Phoenix was about to spread her wings again. First Officer Reeves broke the tense silence with a routine altitude call, 25,000 feet, leveling off. Her voice carried the steady professionalism of a pilot with over 8,000 flight hours, but Zara caught the subtle tremor beneath it. Even experienced aviators weren't trained for situations like this. The hostile fighters adjusted their formation, moving slightly ahead, a tactical position that provided maximum visual coverage while maintaining engagement capability. Whoever was commanding this operation understood aerial intercept procedures intimately. UAL 847, you will maintain radio silence until further instructed, came the voice over the speakers. Any unauthorized transmissions will be considered hostile action. Morrison started to respond, but Zara placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. She pointed to a secondary radio frequency display, then made subtle gestures indicating they should switch to an alternate channel. Her fingers moved with muscle memory from countless combat missions where communication security meant survival. "Emergency frequency," she whispered, so quietly the words were barely audible even in the enclosed cockpit. 121.5. Morrison's eyes widened with understanding. While maintaining their primary radio silence, he carefully adjusted a backup transmitter to the international emergency frequency. The movement was so slight it wouldn't be visible from the escort aircraft. Zara leaned toward the microphone, her voice barely a breath. "Mayday, Mayday. This is United Airlines Flight 847, Boeing 777-200, approximately 300 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. We are under hostile escort by unknown military aircraft, being forced toward North Korean airspace. 237 souls aboard, including State Department officials and Senator Williams. Request immediate assistance." She released the transmit button and switched back to the primary frequency in one fluid motion. If the hostile aircraft were monitoring emergency channels, they'd given away nothing. If friendly forces were listening. Seconds stretched into minutes. The Pacific Ocean rolled beneath them, deceptively peaceful from altitude. Passengers in the cabin behind them were probably wondering about the course change, maybe noticing the fighter escort, beginning to ask questions that flight attendants couldn't answer honestly. Then so faint it might have been atmospheric interference. "UAL 847, this is USS Carl Vinson. We copy your mayday. Confirm your position and heading." Zara's heart rate elevated for the first time since this crisis began. The Carl Vinson was a Nimitz-class supercarrier, one of the most powerful warships ever built, if they were within communication range. She adjusted the frequency slightly and whispered coordinates: heading, altitude, passenger manifest highlights. Professional, concise, exactly the way she'd been trained to deliver critical information under fire. "UAL 847, we are tracking your position. Be advised, we are launching intercept aircraft. Maintain current heading and altitude until further notice. Do not acknowledge this transmission." Relief flooded through Morrison's features, but Zara remained focused on the tactical situation. Help was coming, but they were still 90 minutes from North Korean airspace with hostile escorts who wouldn't hesitate to engage if they detected rescue attempts. "Captain," she said quietly, "I need to prepare the cabin. Passengers deserve to know what's happening and, more importantly, what might happen next." Morrison nodded reluctantly. "What do I tell them?" "The truth. We're dealing with a hostile intercept, but help is coming. They need to follow crew instructions without question, stay calm, and be prepared for rapid maneuvering." She stood, smoothing her suit jacket, an unconscious gesture from countless pre-mission briefings. "And Captain, when those Navy fighters arrive, things are going to happen very fast. You'll need to be ready to execute emergency maneuvers on my command." "You want me to turn over aircraft control to a passenger?" Morrison's question wasn't challenging, just clarifying protocol in an unprecedented situation. "You want 237 people to reach their destination alive," Zara countered. "Because right now, I'm the only person aboard this aircraft who's been in aerial combat. The only one who knows how fighter pilots think, how they engage targets, how to exploit the brief windows when survival becomes possible." Morrison studied her face, the calm confidence, the unconscious way she'd positioned herself to monitor both the instruments and the escort fighters simultaneously. "What's your assessment, Major?" "We're not passengers anymore, Captain. We're combatants, whether we chose to be or not. And combatants who want to survive follow the lead of whoever knows the enemy best." Outside the cockpit windows, the hostile fighters maintained their perfect formation, sunlight glinting off their canopies. Professional, patient, deadly. But somewhere behind them, racing across the Pacific at supersonic speed, American naval aviators were preparing to engage in what could become the first aerial combat involving a civilian airliner since World War II. Zara Khalil, Billionaire CEO, was about to remember exactly why her call sign was Phoenix. Because sometimes, what rises from ashes burns even brighter than what came before. The cabin of UAL 847 had grown increasingly tense during the past hour. Passengers noticed the course deviation, the unusual radio silence, the way flight attendants moved with barely concealed anxiety. When Zara emerged from the cockpit and requested use of the public address system, conversations died throughout the aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Major Zara Khalil, United States Air Force, retired. Her voice carried through the cabin with unmistakable authority. I need to inform you of our current situation. We are being escorted by hostile military aircraft toward North Korean airspace. This is not a hijacking in the traditional sense. It appears to be a targeted extraction operation. Gasps and nervous whispers rippled through the passenger compartment. Someone started crying. The software engineer from 8B stared at her with something approaching awe. However, Zara continued, her tone steady and reassuring, I've contacted the USS Carl Vinson, and naval aviation assets are being deployed to assist us. You need to know that when they arrive, this aircraft may need to perform emergency maneuvers. Follow crew instructions immediately and without question. Stay seated, keep your seatbelts fastened, and remain calm. She paused, looking out at 236 faces. Business travelers, families, vacationers, diplomats, all depending on decisions she would make in the next crucial hours. I spent 7 years flying combat missions in some of the most dangerous airspace in the world. I know these situations, and I know how to handle them. Trust your crew, trust the process, and trust that American forces are coming to bring us home. As she moved back toward the cockpit, the software engineer grabbed her sleeve. Ma'am, Major, how did you know? About the fighter aircraft, I mean. You identified them before anyone else even saw them. Zara glanced toward the window where the escort fighters remained visible, their angular forms cutting through the afternoon sky with mechanical precision. Because, Mr. Hendricks, she said, having noted his name from his frequent complaints to the flight attendants, when you've spent enough time in the sky, you learn to recognize death approaching from a very great distance. Back in the cockpit, tension had ratcheted even higher. The hostile aircraft had moved closer, their formation tightening as if sensing approaching interference. First Officer Reeves monitored multiple radio frequencies, while Captain Morrison maintained their forced heading with white-knuckled determination. Contact bearing 040, distance approximately 40 miles and closing fast, Reeves reported. Multiple aircraft, high-speed approach. Zara slipped back into the observer seat, her trained eyes immediately assessing the tactical display. That'll be our Navy friends. FA-18 Super Hornets from the Vinson, probably a full squadron. They'll approach from the southeast to maintain sun angle advantage. The radio crackled with the familiar voice of their hostile escort. UAL 847, be advised that approaching aircraft will be engaged if they interfere with this operation. Maintain heading and altitude. Morrison's voice was tight with stress. They're threatening to fire on American military aircraft. They're bluffing, Zara said immediately. Shooting down Navy fighters over international waters would be an act of war. They want their prize intact, whatever that prize is, not a smoking crater in the Pacific. But even as she spoke, her tactical mind ran through scenarios. If she was wrong, if these pilots were willing to escalate to combat, the next few minutes would see weapons engagement at altitudes and speeds that civilian aircraft were never designed to survive. Multiple contacts now visible, Reeves called out. Jesus, there must be 8, 10, 12 of them. Through the cockpit glass, contrails appeared on the horizon like white scars against the blue sky. The approaching naval aircraft were flying in combat formation, their approach vectors calculated to provide maximum tactical advantage while maintaining plausible deniability. close enough to engage, far enough to avoid immediate provocation. The hostile escorts reacted immediately, their formation shifting to defensive positioning. Professional pilots, Zara noted again, with excellent situational awareness and disciplined maneuvering. Whatever military trained them had done exceptional work. UAL 847, this is Commander Sarah Blackwood, VFA 147 Argonauts off the USS Carl Vinson. We have you visual and are moving to intercept your escorts. Be prepared for rapid course corrections on my mark. Captain Morrison looked to Zara with an expression caught between relief and terror. Major, what happens now? Zara's eyes remained fixed on the approaching drama unfolding in the sky around them. 12 American naval fighters closing on 2 hostile escorts, with a civilian airliner caught in the middle. Mathematics of aerial combat, calculations of closure rates and weapons envelopes, the deadly geometry of modern air warfare. Now, Captain, we find out if I'm as good as I used to be. The first phase of the intercept developed with textbook precision. Commander Blackwood's squadron approached in loose combat spread, their Super Hornets configured for air-to-air engagement, but maintaining non-threatening posture. The hostile escorts responded by tightening formation around UAL 847, a clear signal that they considered the airliner their protective responsibility. Unknown aircraft escorting UAL 847. This is Commander Blackwood, United States Navy. You are ordered to break off immediately and allow this civilian aircraft to proceed to its filed destination. Failure to comply will be considered a hostile act. The response came in heavily accented English. American aircraft, you are interfering in a legitimate security operation. Withdraw immediately or face consequences. Zara leaned forward, studying the tactical situation with trained eyes. Commander Blackwood, this is Major Khalil aboard UAL 847. I'm reading the escort aircraft as F-16C Block 50s, probably Pakistani or Turkish variants based on their avionics configuration. Two-ship element, both aircraft carrying AIM-120 AMRAAM and AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles in standard air-to-air loadout. A pause over the radio then. Major Khalil, confirm you are qualified to make that assessment. 7 years active duty, F-22 pilot, call sign Phoenix. I've tangled with F-16s before, Commander, both as allies and adversaries. Copy that, Phoenix. What's your tactical assessment? Zara's mind automatically calculated the three-dimensional chess game developing around them. 12 Navy fighters versus 2 escorts, but with the critical constraint that any weapons engagement risked destroying the civilian aircraft they were all supposedly trying to protect. They're in a defensive posture, but they're not running, she reported. That suggests either extreme confidence in their mission parameters or, she paused, studying the escort formation more carefully, or they're buying time for something else. Even as she spoke, her suspicion proved correct. New radar contacts appeared on the tactical display, additional aircraft approaching from the northwest, flying low and fast. Commander Blackwood, we have additional contacts bearing 310 multiple aircraft, possibly strike package inbound. The radio exploded with activity as the Navy pilots identified the new threat. 4 additional F-16s, flying in attack formation and carrying what appeared to be air-to-ground ordnance. UAL 847, this is Blackwood. We have a strike package approaching your position. You need to break from your escorts now. Turn hard left, heading 180 maximum descent rate. Captain Morrison's hands froze on the controls. Breaking away meant abandoning the forced heading, directly defying the escort aircraft that had already threatened to engage them for any course deviation. Major, Morrison said quietly, if we turn, they'll fire on us. Zara looked out at the escort fighters, now less than 500 meters off their wingtip, close enough to see the pilot in the nearest cockpit, his helmet and oxygen mask concealing any human features, close enough to see the missile pylons under his wings. "Captain, in approximately 2 minutes, those 4 aircraft approaching from the northwest are going to fire air-to-ground missiles at something in this general area. If we maintain current heading and altitude, we're going to be right in the middle of their target zone." Morrison's face went pale. "They're going to shoot us down." "They're going to shoot at something," Zara corrected. "Whether that's us, the Navy fighters, or some target I haven't identified yet, I don't know. But I do know that staying here is not an option." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Multiple military aircraft from at least 2 different air forces, civilian passengers caught in the crossfire, and the very real possibility that someone was about to start shooting in one of the most congested pieces of airspace over the Pacific. "Commander Blackwood, this is Phoenix. Request immediate close air support. We are breaking from escort formation in 30 seconds. "Copy, Phoenix. All Argonaut flight elements, weapons free, engage any aircraft that fires on the civilian traffic." Zara turned to Morrison, her voice carrying the absolute confidence of someone who had faced death in the sky before and survived. "Captain, on my mark, you're going to turn this aircraft harder than you've ever turned a 777 before. Maximum bank angle, full power, emergency descent. Trust your aircraft and trust your training." Morrison's knuckles were white on the controls, but he nodded grimly. "Ready, Major." "First Officer Reeves, get on the PA and tell everyone to brace for emergency maneuvering. Now." Reeves' voice echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, assume crash position immediately. Hold on tight." Zara watched the approaching strike aircraft, calculating closure rates, weapons release points, the narrow window between survival and disaster. 7 years removed from active duty, but the training never truly faded. The instincts remained sharp, the calculations automatic. "Mark," she called out. Captain Morrison threw the Boeing 777 into the steepest turn the aircraft had ever attempted. The Boeing 777 responded to Morrison's input like a living creature suddenly awakened to mortal danger. The massive airliner rolled left with surprising agility, its twin engines screaming as they spooled up to maximum power. G-forces pressed everyone aboard deep into their seats as the aircraft entered a diving turn that pushed the airframe to its structural limits. Zara monitored the maneuver with professional detachment, her inner ear automatically compensating for the extreme attitude changes while her eyes tracked the tactical situation outside. The hostile escorts reacted immediately. The lead F-16 broke formation and moved to intercept their escape vector, while his wingman maintained position as if expecting exactly this maneuver. "He's locking us up," Reeves called out, her voice tight with controlled fear as threat warning indicators began blaring in the cockpit. "Targeting radar is active." But Commander Blackwood's squadron was already moving. 2 Super Hornets dove on the threatening F-16, their approach vector calculated to force him to break off his attack or face immediate engagement. The deadly ballet of aerial combat unfolded around the fleeing airliner with split-second timing that represented thousands of hours of training and millions of dollars of advanced weaponry. Break lock," Blackwood's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Any weapons release on the civilian aircraft will be met with immediate retaliation." The F-16 pilot held his targeting radar on UAL-847 for exactly 3 more seconds, long enough to demonstrate capability, not quite long enough to justify the Navy fighter's opening fire. Then he broke lock and pulled up into a climbing turn, rejoining his wingman in loose formation. But the approaching strike package continued inbound, now less than 20 miles out and closing fast. "UAL-847, this is Blackwood. We're tracking 4 additional hostiles inbound your position, carrying what appears to be air-to-ground ordnance. They're not responding to radio calls, and their approach vector suggests attack intent. Zara studied the radar display, her mind automatically plotting interception courses and weapons engagement zones. Something about this situation felt wrong, too coordinated, too precisely timed. Commander Blackwood, this is Phoenix. I'm reading those inbound aircraft as F-16 Block 52s, probably carrying AGM-65 Maverick missiles. But their approach vector doesn't make sense for an attack on our position. Explain. If they wanted to shoot down a civilian airliner, they'd approach from our 6 o'clock, a stern engagement where they'd have maximum missile effectiveness and minimum risk from escort fighters. Instead, they're approaching from our beam, which suggests. Understanding hit her like a physical blow. They're not here to shoot us down. They're here to shoot down the rescue fighters. The tactical picture suddenly made perfect sense. The two escort fighters weren't trying to destroy UAL-847, they were protecting it. The approaching strike package wasn't targeting the civilian aircraft, they were targeting the Navy fighters that had come to rescue it. Commander Blackwood, this is Phoenix. You've flown into a trap. The civilian aircraft was bait to draw your squadron into a predetermined kill zone. Those inbound fighters are carrying anti-aircraft missiles specifically configured to engage FA-18s. A moment of silence over the radio, then Blackwood's voice, now edged with grim understanding. All Argonaut elements, we have a furball developing. Multiple bandits inbound, weapons free, engage anything that isn't squawking friendly. The sky around them erupted into controlled chaos. 12 Navy fighters against 6 hostile aircraft, with a civilian airliner carrying 237 souls caught in the middle of what was rapidly becoming the largest aerial engagement over the Pacific since World War II. Captain Morrison fought to control the 777 as it continued its emergency descent, the aircraft buffeting through turbulence and stress loads it was never designed to handle. Passengers screamed as the plane shook violently, emergency oxygen masks dropping from overhead compartments as cabin pressure fluctuated. "Major, I don't know how much more of this the aircraft can take," Morrison called out over the noise of straining engines and rattling airframe. Zara keyed her radio again. "Commander Blackwood, Phoenix here. We need immediate escort to friendly airspace. This aircraft is a civilian Boeing 777 with structural limitations. We can't sustain combat maneuvering indefinitely." "Copy, Phoenix. We're engaging the strike package now. Maintain best possible speed toward heading 090. We'll try to keep them off your back." Through the cockpit windows, the first air-to-air missile launches became visible, white trails of smoke and fire, as AIM-120 AMRAAMs left their pylons at Mach 4, seeking targets with electronic determination. The mathematical precision of modern aerial warfare, life and death decided by computers and radar systems operating faster than human reflexes. But in the observer seat of a civilian airliner, watching American naval aviators fight for their lives against unknown adversaries, Zara Khalil felt something she hadn't experienced in 7 years of civilian life. She felt the familiar burn of combat in her veins, the electric clarity that came when survival depended entirely on skill, training, and the will to win. Phoenix was awakening. The first missile impact lit up the sky 3 miles ahead of them, a brilliant flash of orange and white as an AIM-120 AMRAAM found its target. One of the attacking F-16s disappeared in an expanding fireball of burning aviation fuel and scattered aluminum, the debris tumbling toward the Pacific far below. "Splash 1, came Commander Blackwood's voice over the radio, professional satisfaction mixed with grim determination. "Tally ho on the remaining bandits." But the engagement was far from over. The surviving hostile aircraft had spread into combat formation, their pilots demonstrating the kind of tactical discipline that suggested extensive training and combat experience. These weren't insurgents flying stolen jets. These were professional military aviators with advanced aircraft and sophisticated weaponry. Captain Morrison struggled to maintain control as the Boeing 777 continued its emergency descent through increasingly violent turbulence generated by the aerial combat around them. At 22,000 feet and descending, they were entering the thicker atmosphere where the aircraft's massive engines could generate more thrust, but also where combat maneuvering became increasingly dangerous. "Phoenix, this is Blackwood. We've got multiple bandits engaging. I need you to get that airliner as far from this furball as possible." Zara studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating vectors and distances. "Commander, we're limited to approximately 450 knots maximum speed, and we can't sustain high-G maneuvering. Where do you want us?" "Heading 090, maximum speed. Descend to flight level 150. We'll try to keep them busy while you get clear of the engagement zone." Another missile launch became visible through the cockpit glass, this time from one of the hostile aircraft, its AGM-65 Maverick streaking toward one of the Navy fighters with deadly precision. The Super Hornet pilot saw it coming and deployed countermeasures, chaff and flares creating a brilliant constellation of false targets, but the missile's infrared seeker was too sophisticated to be easily fooled. The impact, when it came, was devastating. The FA-18 simply disintegrated under the direct hit, its pilot's ejection seat firing barely a second before the aircraft exploded. A parachute blossomed against the blue sky, carrying Commander Sarah Blackwood toward the Pacific surface 2 miles below. "Blackwood is down," came a voice over the radio. "Repeat, Commander Blackwood has ejected. Someone get a SAR bird in the air." Zara felt the loss like a physical blow. She'd never met Commander Blackwood, had spoken to her for less than 10 minutes, but the woman had been willing to risk her life to save a civilian aircraft, had paid the price for that decision with her $20 million fighter and possibly her life. "First Officer Reeves, get me the emergency frequency," Zara said quietly. "Ma'am." "The emergency frequency, now." Reeves complied, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted radio controls. Zara took the microphone, her voice carrying across multiple channels to every military receiver within 200 miles. All stations, this is Major Zara Khalil, call sign Phoenix, United States Air Force. I am aboard civilian flight UAL-847 under hostile escort and attack. Commander Blackwood of VFA-147 has been shot down protecting this aircraft. I am requesting immediate combat air patrol and search and rescue support." She paused, looking out at the continuing aerial battle around them. "I'm also declaring my intention to assume tactical command of this situation under emergency military authority. Any American military personnel receiving this transmission, you are ordered to provide immediate assistance to UAL-847 and conduct search and rescue operations for Commander."